He has worked previously as a reader in computer science and engineering, Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology, and lecturer in information technology, Bengal Engineering and Science University, Shibpur, now IIEST. His PhD from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, Jadavpur University. His MS in Electrical and Computer Engineering from Kansas State University, USA, and BTech in Computer Science and Engineering from Kolkata University, India. He has worked as a business system analyst in Blue Cross Blue Shield, New York, USA, and as a quality analyst in Bensoft International, Phoenix, USA. And he has also consultant project manager in software industry. He has also visiting scientist at Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata. He has also worked in technical education administration in regional office and assistant director on deputation at AICT under MHRD, Government of India. He has a NCERT National Scholar, New Delhi, and Tilford Dow Scholar, USA. His biography has been published in 28th edition of National Dean's List, USA, and he is a member of IEEE and honorary senior member of IACI CSIT Singapore. He has several publications in international and national journals and peer-reviewed conference. He has also TPC committee member IEEE international conferences in Southeast Asia, and editor of IAES International Journal of Artificial Intelligence, and editor of Journal of Image Processing and Pattern Recognition. Progress. Now, I'd like to invite Dr. Das to deliver his lecture on this virtual platform. Sir, please.
Yeah, thank you, Shomit. Shomit is also my PhD scholar, along with being assistant professor at Government General Degree College, Shingur. I would like to first thank all the authorities of the Government General Degree College, Shingur, for inviting me for giving a talk at this state level webinar on deep dive in machine learning. I would like to thank the principal, Dr. Shantanu Chakraborty, the IQAC coordinator, Dr. Choitali Chaudhuri, as well as the HOD, Department of Computer Science, and also Professor Shomit Bhanjo for this. And also the other faculty members of the department, as well as I would welcome the participants for this state level webinar. So machine learning is basically one of my research areas, which we are working on for quite some time. And we have also received a consultancy project from Hewlett Packard on developing a machine learning unit at Alia University. So I'll just straight away move into the presentation. And what I understand is there. Okay, is my presentation being visible to everyone? Yeah, Google says yes. Am I audible also, Shomit?
Yes, yes, sir, you are audible. And your presentation is showing.
Okay, fine, great. So basically, today my topic is machine learning for images. And this, as I was saying, that machine learning in today's is a very hot topic in today's world. And basically it has a lot of applications. Because I have a background of image processing as well as machine learning, and I wanted to discuss with the participants. And I assume that I was said that most of the participants are UG level. so BSc level. I've tried to make it very simple, and maybe after the presentation, I can also take up a few questions if you have. So basically, what I will do is I will start the presentation. And as I was saying, like in image processing, it is defined as technical analysis of an image by using complex algorithms, and where image is the input, and you get some useful information as the output. Whereas in artificial intelligence industry, this is also turning into a considerable growth curve. You have heard about Forbes. They believe that AI and machine learning, they will be creating additional of like 2.6 trillion US dollars in value in the year 2022 in marketing and sales, and maybe over up to $2 trillion in manufacturing and supply chain planning. So beforehand, basically, image processing only suggested examining the discrete targets in an image. Making use of AI and machine learning can result in a lot of differences in the image processing industry. And Google is working on it. There are so many multinational companies who are working on it, like Amazon, IBM, Cognizant. So people are working on it. Basically, when you say machine learning having applications, first one which comes into mind, or which we see quite often, is the healthcare industry. Image analysis, it can be of great use in the healthcare industry. Computer vision software based on deep learning algorithms is already making things more comfortable in the healthcare industry. And such software is making automated analysis possible to deliver more accurate results at a faster rate. And most of the hospitals, they have started using this kind of technologies. And like in medical X-ray, the radiologists, they try to study the X-ray to search for anomalies, and by using use of different automated image analysis with the advanced deep learning algorithms, the burden of the radiologists, that can be reduced when we are doing a mass screening, and it is more accurate and more faster, and it is more foolproof, in the sense a human can make an error, but a machine won't make an error. So that is the basis of this. And also now medical robots are being used to perform like delicate diagnosis and surgeries by making use of extremely high quality 3D images that wouldn't have been available otherwise. And also image processing with machine learning, this has a very good application in defense, like the progression it has revolutionized warfare. Even today, I was reading the newspaper Times of India, and I was finding how the Indian Army is planning for, robots and drones, and, working in the next generation warfare. So this kind of research along with the implementation is going on. Remote controlled drones can be now used to capture perceptions of small such places and analyze using deep learning algorithms. If you remember recently, the Taliban chief, he was caught by the FBI, that is the Federal Bureau of Investigations. They and the CIA, those who are sitting in the US, how can they, detect such a terrorist sitting in Pakistan, in Abbottabad? But he was detected using certain satellite imagery, as well as certain deep learning, utilizing certain deep learning algorithms. He was being monitored by cameras. So even monitoring cameras, that would be giving an alert when a person is near the door, and can understand who the person is. So image processing can make it happen and will change the world completely. Another application of machine learning would be in the automobile industry. The automobile industry has seen a tremendous metamorphosis in the prior decade, but nothing can overcome the innovation this industry is about to witness. Like you guys have heard about self-driving cars. Self-driving cars are, the greatest thing ever to happen in the automobile industry. They do all the driving for us. So, you sit here and you want to go to, say, Shingur or from Kolkata, or you want to go to anywhere, you just sit in a self-driving car and you just forget. You can just take a rest. And you will be there in Shingur in no time and absolutely safe. So that is what the planning is. So, just imagine how the world would be so nice, where we would reach places without any traffic blocks. Students of this college in Shingur, you must be traveling from Kolkata or maybe around Hooghly or somewhere. So you must have noticed like there's so much traffic, and if you can overcome those traffic, how nice would that be? So using this image processing and deep learning, self-driving cars will help reduce the number of collisions also. Self-driving cars would work on based on object detection. Object detection involves like image distribution and image localization. And image classification is identifying what the objects are in the image, and image localization is about providing specific locations about this object. And this is achieved by making use of AI and machine learning technologies. In agriculture also we have application. Agriculture, we are using different, satellite imaging, and we are identifying the soil, the climate, and even we are, weed will spoil a plant. They will eat up the crop. So weeds are those foreign plants that are grown in the fields, and it competes with the crops to get better environmental conditions, including water, fertilizer, and even sunlight. So edge-based machine classifiers can detect these weeds. Infrared image analysis can assist in understanding and monitor of the irrigation systems. Even the infrared image analysis can be used to prognosticate the harvest time, so we can maintain and we can forecast the harvest time. And computer vision and image processing can also be used to rate food stocks based on color, volume, and shape. This is also used in the tea industry, where the tea leaf is being automatically monitored using image analysis as well as machine learning to see the quality of the tea. The tea board of Government of India is using that. So there are this benefits of image processing and how AI will transform the world of image processing is not limited to what I just discussed. We are still in the beginning stages, and so I'm just focusing today's this lecture where machine learning is so important, and we'll focus on the machine learning for images. Okay, so the images we see, what we see. See here in the image, you can see that a train, this is like an old British platform where the train has come out of the platform and it has fallen down. So this is what we see. It's a steam engine, we can see that. So this is the image, what we see. So what exactly a computer sees? Can the computer identify whether this is a train, a steam train, or this is a station, or whether it has fallen? No. It will see this image as binary digits, bits. So we see that it will be a matrix consisting of different numbers. Say if it's a grayscale image, it will have 0 to 255. If If it's a binary image that is like white and black, it will have zeros and ones. If it's a color image, it will have like a matrix in the matrix form, 3 by matrix form. So yeah. Can someone?
Okay, sir, you can continue.
Yeah, someone has the microphone on.
Yes, yes.
I would request to turn off the microphone, and I can take up questions after my presentation, after my talk. So the computer vision is problem would be how to extract meaning out of these two-dimensional arrays. So this is what the computer sees. So how to extract the meaning out of these two-dimensional arrays, because this is just an array of numbers. So next. So now we talk about what information can be extracted from the images. So we see this image. So can you make out like what exactly this is? It to me it looks like two cars in front of some old buildings, and maybe seeing these buildings and this this path. This looks like a cobalt path. I mean, this will be more of like the European setting. I can see a person also standing. So, so first is we try to get the geometric information of the image. We can see the buildings and geometry of the buildings. So now we try to get the semantic information. We see that there's a tree, there's a chimney, there's a building, window, cars. As I said, it is an outdoor scene. It's a European city. We have the ground. We have a person standing, trash can, door, buildings, roof. So the sky, it's all there. So this is the semantic information. So moving from what information can be extracted from the images, we go to a small kind of thing that in the 1960s, Marvin Minsky, a professor in the US, he assigned a couple of undergraduate students to spend the summer programming a computer to use a camera to identify objects in a scene. He figured they would have some problem solved by the end of the summer. And to understand that, even half a century later, even it's more than 60 years, so still the problem is not solved. So just by getting a camera and to identify the objects in a scene, it is still not being foolproof to identify it. A lot of image processing algorithms are going on, machine learning algorithms are going on, but still it's not foolproof. So there's a small chit chat here, like when a user takes a photo, the app should check whether they are in a national park. Sure, easy GIS lookup, give me a few hours, and check whether the photo is a bird. So I'll need a research team and 5 years. So basically in CS, in computer science, it can be hard to explain the difference between the easy and the virtually impossible. So hope you get that thing. So machine learning and computer vision. The very old 1960s till the mid 90s, there was this image and you see the home area, human is there, the arm, the forearm, and then the hand. So from the image, we try to find the hand defined features and then the classifier from that. But the old, after that, the 1920s to the 2012, that was like from the image, we have the image gradient, and from there we are trying to find the vectors, so hand defined features, and from there we are trying to gather the classifier. So So machine learning for images. Question is, how do we represent an image as a feature vector X for machine learning? Obviously, I will say that for image processing, you require a lot of mathematics background. And we have the image of a dog, and we try to find the feature vector X. So first idea is just resize the image and flatten out the two-dimensional array into a one-dimensional array. So we can do that, right? Because the two-dimensional array, we can just keep on adding it into a linear array. So, but have you thought, I mean, if we consider like pixels as features, that is a really bad idea, because high dimensionality, if we consider D, say for a little image, 32 by 32 image, that has like D is 1024, almost 1000, over 1000. Whereas the image which we upload in WhatsApp, Facebook, or some Insta, it's of some dimension 1024 by 768. So that dimension comes to over 0.8 million, 0.78 million. So this is what happens. So decision boundaries in the pixel space are extremely complex. We will need big machine learning models with lots of parameters. For example, linear regressors need D parameters. And so big models will be prone to overfitting. So to prevent overfitting, we will need a large number N of samples, N. So pixels would be equal to complex decision boundaries. As I said, you image, and then we have the length D and feature X. So pixels and then complex decision boundaries, we find that the pixel space is almost order of 1 million dimensions. So, so pixels, if we consider that into the number of pixels, that will be a really bad idea. See here, cat, running, tongue, lawn, and we see how this cat, these are cats here. This is running, they are running. This is tongue out, and then in the lawn. So these are some boundaries, how they will overlap. So we don't want that. So what do? We try to go for visual features. Visual features in the image. So that would be, what is a good feature space? So how do we produce a good feature space for images? So that will be our priority. And so we come to the steps. There are 3 steps in feature extraction framework. The first one is focus on interest points in the scene. So you see the image, and then we try to find the interest points. Here we have done it through difference of Gaussian interest points. So what basically is the difference of Gaussian? In difference of Gaussian or DOG, it's a feature enhancement algorithm that involves the subtraction of one blurred version of an original image from another less version of the original. In case of grayscale images, it will be the blurred images are obtained by convolving the original grayscale images with the Gaussian kernels having different standard deviations. So blurring an image using a Gaussian kernel suppresses only the high frequency spatial information. Subtracting one image from the other preserves spatial information that lies between the range of frequencies that are preserved in the two blurred image. Thus, the image of the Gaussians is like a band pass filter that discards all but a handful of spatial frequencies that are present in the original grayscale image. So there is a mathematics for this difference of Gaussian. And also we apply LOG or the Laplacian of Gaussian. So basically Laplacian filters are like derivatives filters used to find areas of rapid change, like edges in the image, like when you have a certain white background and certainly you have a black background in the back, so you have an edge. So since the derivative filters are very sensitive to noise, it is common to smooth the image example, using a Gaussian filter before applying the Laplacian. So this two-step process, it's also a huge mathematics. It is called the Laplacian of Gaussian. So basically, what happens is there are different interest points we find through difference of Gaussians, Laplacian of Gaussians, I've explained in brief. And then there are Harris corner points, good features to track, and others. So that is, even we can do it for evenly spaced grid. So next step would be to compute the features at interest points. So you have the feature interest point. Now you need to compute the features. So we use different algorithms like the visualize SIFT features, then the HOG, SURF, GIST, HAR features, HAR transform. So basically I will talk about what is SIFT. SIFT is like the scale invariant feature transform. SIFT, it's a feature detection algorithm we use in computer vision to detect and describe local features in images. It was published by David Lowe in 1999, and SIFT key points or objects are first extracted from a set of reference images and then stored in a database. An object is recognized in a new image by individually comparing each feature from the new image to the database and finding candidate matching features based on the Euclidean distance of their feature vector. So from the full set of matches, subset of key points that agree to the object of it and its location, scale, orientation. So that would be like good matches. So this also, we can use using generalized Howe transform, and each cluster of 3 or more features that agree on an object. So that would be basically, we can do it for model verification, and subsequently the outliers, that is the outside, those can be discarded. So that is SIFT. And we also said you HOG. HOG is nothing but histogram of oriented gradients. So the histogram of oriented gradients is a feature descriptor used in computer vision and image processing for the purpose of object detection. Basically, the technique counts the occurrences of gradient orientation in localized portions of an image. And it's very similar to the edge orientation histograms, or the SIFT also, the scale invariant feature transform descriptors, and also shape context. But they differ in it is computed on a dense grid of uniformly spaced cells and uses overlapping local contrast normalization for improved accuracy. So this was the different algorithms where we try to compute the features at the interest points. So the next step, step 3, is to convert to fixed dimensional feature vector. So we use different techniques. Here we have the A alphabet, and then this, and then the sense and the others. And we try to identify how many are there in the image, and we try to plot a histogram. Histogram is nothing but how many, say this A, how many times the A occurs. So here the A occurs, say 50 times. So we plot 50 here. Say here this occurs 25 times. So we plot 25 here in the image, like that. So this is basically the histogram, the number of bins we plot for each frequencies. So what is bag of words? Bag of words is very, or BOW, it's a method to extract features from text documents. These features can be used for training machine learning algorithms. It creates a vocabulary of all unique words occurring in the document in the training set. In simple terms, it's a collection of words to represent a sentence with word count and mostly disregarding the order in which they appear. So BO is used, this bag of words is mainly used with natural language processing, information retrieval from documents, document classification. And on a high level, it involves, you have the document, you need to clean the text, then you need to tokenize, then build the vocabulary, and then finally generate the vectors. So generated vectors can be input to your machine learning algorithm. Say I'll give you an example. Say a sentence, two sentences are there. One, first sentence, John likes to watch movies. Mary likes movies too. Second sentence, John also likes to watch football games. So this two sentence can be also represented with a collection of words. Say John likes to watch movies. Mary likes movies too. And also for the second sentence, we have John also likes to watch football games. So further, what we do is for each sentence, we remove the multiple occurrence of the word and use the word count to represent like this. John would be 1, likes 2 times, 2 is 1, watch is 1, movies 2, Mary 1, 2 is 1. Similarly, for the second sentence, John is 1, also is 1, likes is 1, 2 is 1, watch is 1, football is 1, games is 1. So assuming these sentences are part of the document, we can combine the word frequency for our entire document. So both sentence we can combine like this. John, there is 2, likes 3, 2 times, watch 2 times, movies 2 times, Mary 1 times, 2 1 times, also 1 times, football 1 times, games 1 times. So what we understand is from the vocabulary of the words in a document, what we can do, the respective word count, which will be used to create the vectors for each of the sentence. So the length of the vector will always be equal to the vocabulary size. In this case, the vector length is like 11, say. So in order to represent our original sentence in a vector, we can initialize that with zeros, like it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 zeros. So this will be like followed with iteration. And so this is how we work on the bag of words. So it's a very interesting solution. Similarly, we have the spatial pyramids. It's also a similar thing. In the spatial pyramid, what we do, it's a collection of orderless feature histograms computed over cells defined by a multi-level recursive image decomposition. And it cannot take advantage of the regularities in the image composition and the spatial arrangement of the features. So, which can make very powerful cues for the scene classification task. So, resulting spatial pyramid we can do. So, that is also very important. So, after all this, we are now ready for machine learning. Okay, so we have already extracted the feature, what we were talking about. So this is just a little bit history of the successes of machine learning in Vision pre-2012. So we had the Viola-Jones phase detector with AdaBoost. We used to do so phase detection here using it's available in GitHub also. Then we have the deformable parts model object detection with the SVMs or support vector machines. And then we have the GIST scene retrieval with the nearest neighbors. So this was all this pre-2012. So machine learning in computer vision, we had already talked about the very old, the old, and now post-2012, what we are doing. So we have a different thing. We have the we do the input, we do the convolution, then we have the feature maps, we do the subsampling, we do the again convolution, again subsampling. So then finally we get the output. So jointly learned features, what we do. So hand-defined classifier with the learned classifier. So jointly learned features plus the classifier, what we are doing post 2012. So we move to neural networks. So this is the basic structure of artificial neural network. We have the input units, then we have the hidden units, and finally we have the output units. Layered feed forward network. Neural networks are made up of nodes or units. Those are connected by links, as we see. Each link has an associated weight here, an activation level, and each node has an input function typically summing over the weighted inputs, an activation function, and an output. So this is a basic structure. And obviously, this neural networks was, as we know as artificial neural networks, this has a biological inspiration. So what is the biological neural network? Most of you have studied in biology in class 10, 12. It's thought and supposed to be the consciousness occurs as a result of cascading firing of neurons in the brain. So this is basically a neuron, and we have the nucleus, we have the dendrites, which are connected with the axon here. They are connected with another neuron, the axon hillock, the Golgi apparatus, and all those mitochondria, and the power generator. So neurons fire electrically via an action potential. Neurons can have different activation threshold. So neural function. Neurons connect to each other via synapses. The action potential is propagated to connecting neurons by releasing this neurotransmitter. Synapses, that is the junction between the neurons, the dendrite and the axon, this can be excitatory or inhibitory. It can excite or it can inhibit. So learning occurs via the neural plasticity. The connection strength between neurons undergoes short and long-term changes. The human brain has about 1011 neurons and about 10 to the power 14 synapses. So you can imagine how many connections are there. This is a brain structure, human brain. Different areas of the brain have different typical functions. Regions are generally consistent, but small scale feature structures can vary. So we see the cerebellum, cerebrum, the medulla oblongata, and so many parts of the brain. And we also find the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, and occipital lobe, and all these lobes. So some regions are more plastic, as I was telling, than the others. We don't really understand how the human structure is thought or consciousness. So that is still under research now. We don't know how different functions are assigned, partly based on the physical connections to sensory and motory neurons, partly due to experience learning. So these are still not known, this wonderful thing about the human brain and how it kind of sends impulses. So we are not knowing that till date. And functionality of the region can, I mean, a lot of research is being done, but we have still not aware of how exactly or what exactly we are doing. And functionality of a region can change over time. That's the plasticity. And functional regions can move, expand, or contract. So we see here the functional areas of the cerebral cortex. So we have the different visual, the association, the motor function, and different auditory areas, and all this. So this is what we are getting. The one learning algorithm hypothesis. So basically you see with the eye we see it, and with the ear we hear it. But what happens in the auditory cortex? Auditory cortex learns to see. Sometimes we cannot, the ear cannot let us see. Even same with the somatosensory. That means the touch. From the palm we can feel, touch. From the eye we can see. So the somatosensory cortex learns to see, and also the auditory cortex learns to see. So this is what happens. So the one learning algorithm hypothesis. So this were done by two scientists in 92, Rowe et al. And Metin Frost in 1989. And these are the sensory representations in the brain. Seeing with your tongue. So this is the electronic tongue. These are like sensors, and you can taste. I mean, like in the tongue we taste. Similarly, this can be recorded, and this kind of sensory representation in the brain can be sent through using electrodes. Human echolocations like the sonar we know, like when a ship goes into the ocean, it tries to find the depth using a sonar, the ultrasound waves. Similarly, like a dolphin, it uses sonar to get its location. So this was a human echolocation sonar project which was done. Also the haptic belt, where you wear a belt and you have the different direction senses. So where if a blind man wears the belt and moves accordingly, it will help him, enable him to sense directions. And this is like implanting a third eye. You see this a toad, a frog here with 2 eyes, and here we are implanting a third eye to get more senses. So basically now we compare the computing power between the computer and a human brain. This is a 2015 data. In computer, we have the computation units, 10 to the 10 crore Xeon, 10 to the power 9 gates, whereas computation units in the human brains are like 10 to the power 11 neurons. Storage units are 10 to the power 10 bit RAM and 10 to the power 10 bits disk. And for the human, it's 10 to the power 11 neurons as well as 10 to the power 14 synapses. And cycle time is 10 to the power minus 9 second. And this cycle time is much less, 10 to the power minus 3 second. Bandwidth is 10 to the power 9 bits, whereas bandwidth here is much more in the human brain, 10 to the power 14 bits per second. Computers are way faster than neurons, but they are far more neurons than we can reasonably model in modern computers, and they all fire in parallel. So the brain is effectively 1 billion times faster. So we go to the history of neural nets. What we do is history of neural network, which was originally conceived as a learning model that loosely mimicked the brain. Foundation developments in the 1940s, 1960s. Popularity diminished in the 1970s, widely used in 1980s and early 90s. Again, popularity diminished in the late 90s. Again, recent resurgence, we see the state-of-art techniques for many applications. Many techniques were used, were actually developed in the 1960s. A large difference is faster computers and more data. We also have better build algorithms to enable deep networks to be trained. And artificial neural networks are not anywhere near as complex as the natural brain structure. So this is what we see. Neural net basics, we already talked about the input layer, the middle layers, and the output layer, and how the weights we carry forward. So binary classification, y equal to 0 or 1, one output unit. So we get this, and we have the different inputs, and the different contains the different nodes at each layer. Multi-class classification, one hot encoding of the K classes. So basically, you can see that here the pedestrian, the car, the motorcycle, the truck. So multi-class classification can be done using the neural network classification. This is a sample neural network where we have the input layer, the hidden layer, and the output layer. And we have the weights. We assign the weights where the activation function is sigmoid, 1 by 1 plus e minus wtx. This is like exactly the logistic regression. And so this is to identify activation function, maybe sigmoid, and hyperbolic, ReLU, etc. And W, the weights, is usually learnable parameters. The neural nets layers, we have the input, the hidden, the layers, the set of inputs, the weights, which we add to the inputs, activation function in the hidden layer, and finally the outputs. And we need to specify the neurons input to output. Neurons are organized into layers, similar types of neurons, same transfer function, no within layer connections. So usually inputs are all from the same layer and outputs also to the same layer. So we have the neurons, and we find that it's a summation of the weights with the inputs with some, and finally we have the layers where we try to find the activation function along with the weights. So we talk about feed-forward neural networks. We have the layer compositionality. Input includes a feature x0 equal to 1 to permit a bias term. Then from the input layer, we add the weights, and we have the layer where the type neurons, the input layer, the output layer. And the output layer, we can think of this structure as composed of 3 layers and can create a deeper network by stacking the structure on top of itself. So we can create more layers inside, and we can create a deeper network like this. So we have a layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, and so on, layer n. We have the input, and we have the output predicted class probabilities. So learnable, we have the different, need to learn the different weights on this. Now, inference in a neural net. This is the forward pass. What happens is we have the xi inputs, and we have the activation function where we, what we do is we try to find the function of the weights along with the inputs. And in the next layer, we have the W2, F2 is W2 F1, which again F1, this is W2 X1, which is again F1, W1 X1, and similarly it will be carrying on. So finally, this output will be finding us function of L of WL, and then the weights along with the functions. So this is basically the forward propagation or the forward pass. So the activation function also appends a feature of 1 so that bias terms are incorporated into each W. Similarly, reusing the previous computations, we can do find this. And each result is computed based on the previous layer's output. So that is what we were doing using the forward pass. Now we go to backward propagation. What we do is basically we try to find the cost function. Here the cost function would be such that mean squared error regression we can find. We can find the softmax or the cross entropy loss, the multi-class classification, as well as the hinge loss, the binary classification. And so do this cost function seem familiar? There are so many possibilities. Loss function is design, that is also a research area nowadays, and a lot of people are researching on that. So basically we are trying to find the cost function from the inputs, as well as we are trying to derive different types of losses from there, like the mean squared error, the entropy loss, like that. Then in the next step, we are trying to optimize it. We are solving for W star. It's the arc minimum of this. So don't I need to optimize differently for different? No, it's like we use the gradient descent. It is the most general optimization approach we know. But here are some questions. I think we'll just go to the next slide. Learning the backward pass, the forward pass, and going the backward from the loss back to the input. Here, the back propagation of gradients we do to adjust these weights. We try to find fit via the gradient descent. So given current weights, we are finding the direction that increases the loss the most, and we need to go into the opposite direction to minimize L. So update rule. So Basically, I'm not going into the details, but I'll just, I mean, there is some, I understand because it's a UG thing, and most of you are not aware with this. So we do a lot of decomposition using the chain rule on this, learning the backward pass. And we are trying to compute. There is so much more mathematics into this. I'll just keep that. Save terms and save and reuse computation. And finally, we get, we compute it. So learning the backward pass, we have the gradient with respect to layer input. Gradient will be passed backward, update layer weight. And then what we do is we will forward, we have the forward pass as well as the backward pass. And this was a summary going to this. We use PyTorch in Python also, defining a network. So here we have given some coding for that. And for defining a network, and then for a training function, like we were talking about, then we do the training, and finally, what happens is we are trying to do the testing on this after the training, and we find, okay, now, I mean, all of you should start working on Python if you have not already done so. I mean, it's a very good scripting language for machine learning. A lot of work is going on, and it's a very easy to learn. And I mean, the industry is now looking for Python programmers. A word of caution for this, neural net training is using gradient descent on the non-convex loss, as you can see in this image, picture here. We are largely building a bag of tricks that seem to coax networks to train well most of the time, but tread very carefully. Issues will be local minima. Minima can be local. So plot the norm of the gradient over time, and there can be saddle points, ill conditioning, exploding, vanishing gradients. I mean, there are things which we can discuss and it will take hours. The neural net toolbox, we have the activation functions, and we do the optimization, we do the managing weights, we do the dropouts, and do the managing training. So the activation functions, the first one would be the sigmoid, then tan hyperbolic ReLU is there. So moving from sigmoid and tan hyperbolic to ReLU was a major advance in training deep nets fast. So you see the ReLU, this has, tan hyperbolic was taking so much epochs, where now ReLU is taking so minimum number of epochs, so less time. Vanishing gradient problem. One issue with training neural networks is that the loss gradients become very small over the course of the propagation, backpropagation. By the time they get to the first few layers, this issue is compounded with traditional activation functions like sigmoids and tan hyperbolic, because the gradients are near zero over a large range, making it very hard to update parameters by search. But ReLU improves this by having non-zero gradients over the full positive axis. So we have the ReLU units which are prone to die, because once the unit goes to negative values, it does not receive gradients. So we also have the parametric ReLU for that. And so we are coming almost to the end of today's talk. So deep learning, this was a phrase which was invented to avoid saying multi-layered neural networks during the mid-2000s, to avoid funding shutoff. Funding in the US or mostly funding is given by industries, as well as different agencies are there, government agencies, non-government agencies, as well as in India also we are having such in the academia. So these three scientists, academicians, they were also the Turing Award winners. Turing Award winners is like a Nobel Prize for the computer scientists. So Bengio, Hinton, and LeCun. So they invented this deep learning term. And so they kind of stopped using multi-layered neural network. So impact of deep learning in the computer vision. So we have the ImageNet where the 1000 object category recognition challenge is given. And gradually this ImageNet top 5 objective recognition, we can see that gradually this error is coming down. So from here, it is coming down and it is going minimum. So visual features back, it's basically from the image, we have the neural network. We find the length feature X, and finally, we can identify whether it's a dog and not a cat or not a cow or something like that. So this is my end of today's lecture, and Shomit is there.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Thank you, sir, for your valuable, nice, informative presentation. Now we will start our question answer session. Shall we start, sir?
Yes, please.
First question was asked by Rohit Dhara. What is the difference between AI and ML?
See, AI and ML, as you know, I already discussed in my slides that whatever happened before, in the early time, this 1960s, then I showed you like which was very old, which was old, and from the 1960s to 1990s, when we tried to find the classifier. So that was artificial intelligence, the hand-defined classifier. And then from the 90s to the 2010-12, we tried to find the learned classifier. So that was also where we tried to find the different learned classifier. And finally, what happened from the AI to the machine learning is what we tried to do with the jointly learned features along with the classifier. We have the different, we applied the neural network, and from the neural network, what we had is we had the jointly learned features along with the classifier. So this kind of, when we apply the neural networks to it, we like for today's lecture, it was machine learning with for the images. So what we do is we try to have the set of inputs, the images, and then we try to do a convolution, and then we apply different neural networks, and then we try to identify whether there are if there's a cat, dog, cow, and different animals. You are training the system, and finally, after testing, you can tell, okay, so this image is a dog. This image, this is a cat. So using these neural networks, we are trying to ascertain that this is machine learning. Yeah.
Okay. Next question was asked by Joydeep Das. Is deep learning and neural network algorithms are same?
I think we had already discussed on this, so I mean we can move to the next question.
Now, next question was asked by Partho Ghosh. Parametric ReLU and leaky ReLU are same.
Partho is a UG student. Can Partho talk?
Partho, are you hearing? Are you present, Partho?
Partho, can you tell what is ReLU, which I said? Why are you going into just for the sake of questioning? Are you taking my test or should I take yours? Anyway, I mean, Partho is not there, I think. So anyway, the thing is, I can talk about this, and there are different, as I was talking about, along with sigmoid, ReLU, and parametric ReLU. I mean, there's several things we can talk about, but I think it will make no sense if I talk about you and I discuss about this, because most of you are in basics of this, basics of machine learning, and I think, Shomit, do they need this advanced thing for BSc level?
Most of the participants are from the BSc or post. Most of the participants under UG and PG students, and some of them are the faculty members of different colleges. So, if Partho is here, then he can say that whether he is already familiar with this ReLU or not. If so, then we can proceed for the different types of ReLU.
Yeah, let's club the questions. If there is something different, we can take.
Next question: which editor is best for Python
language? There are different Python editors which we use. Anaconda is there, which some of my students are working on. And I also talked about PyTorch is there. And there are many editors. So just pick up any editor, go to python.org, and you can download the editor from there. Next question, please.
Next question was asked by Rima Joshi. Will MATLAB be good for image processing using machine learning?
This is a very good question. A lot of people work in image processing research using MATLAB. But when you are talking about machine learning, what happens is you have some data. I mean, the inputs that would be okay. So what happened is this: some of the students. What happened is in what I was saying. I just saw the message. In MATLAB, a lot of students are working for image processing. But what happens is when the data set is huge, say suppose you get a data set of satellite image, SAR images or medical images, which are like of huge data set, that is like in some terabyte data. So that, I mean, MATLAB can't handle with that. For that, we require Python. And best will be using GPUs for that. And there is a noise. So basically, if you are working on machine learning or deep learning, I would recommend that you work with Python. Next question.
Next question was asked by Partho Ghosh. What is the task of bias and activation function?
I think I have talked about activation function, and what I can say is basically in activation function, as we saw that in neural networks, when we take a input x multiplied by the weight w, this bias, what it happens is it will allow you to shift the activation function by adding a constant with a given bias to the input. So basically what happens is bias is just like intercept added in a linear equation. It is an additional parameter in the neural network, which is used to adjust the output along with the weighted sum of the inputs to the neuron. Moreover, the bias value will allow you to shift the activation function to either the right or the left. And as I said about the activation function, which decides whether a neuron should be activated or not by calculating the weighted sum and further adding the bias with it. And the purpose of the activation function is to introduce non-linearity into the output of a neuron. So hope you got it. Next one.
Next question was asked by Rajesh Pal. How we will start to learn ML step by step?
Very good question. See, I would recommend you to get hold of any ebooks or any material you can get on the internet. There are some very good courses also, like in Udemy or Coursera. There are different courses, basic level, PG level. So there are different level of courses. And with that, I mean, you start learning the basics. You learn through the different neural networks, the neural network models, the activation functions, you work on those. And parallelly, you try to do the hands-on programming in the Python. Whatever you learn, the models, you try to implement that in the program, in the Python program. So in that way, you will learn. And finally, what you try, there are many different data set that is available for free. You can find in different, I mean, those you can implement in your model, and you try to find the outputs also. And I mean, that would be a very good way to start with. Like, not only you study machine learning, but along with it, you try to program and try to implement those models. And finally, you try to train the model, then you test it, then you get the output, and you feel satisfied. So this you can keep on doing. Next question, please.
Next question was asked by Kaushik Goswami. Bias plays an important role in ML. How can we minimize bias?
I think I have just talked about it. Do I need to repeat again? Or I can just tell you that how do you minimize? I mean, to avoid underfitting in the neural network, or adding parameters, or reducing, regularization parameter. I mean, you can add the neuron layers or input layers, and what happens is basically you can add more training samples or improve their quality. You can do the dropout also, or you can decrease the regularization parameter also. So basically, for the bias, you can have overfitting as well as underfitting. That is the bias variance trade-off, because the bias neuron it's like a special neuron that is added to each layer in the neural network, which you understood, and which simply stores the value of 1. And this makes it possible to move or translate the activation function either to the left or the right of the graph. So without a bias neuron, each neuron takes the input and multiplies it by a weight with nothing else added to the equation. Say, for example, it is not possible to input a value of 0 and output 2. So in many cases, it is necessary to move the entire activation function to the left or right to generate the required output values, and that is made possible by the bias. So although neural networks can work without biased neurons, in reality they are almost always added, and their weights are estimated as part of the overall model.
Next question was asked by Sandeep Tikka. Research scope in AI or ML?
Sandeep, if you have listened to what I started with, I already discussed the different areas, and those are the very niche areas which the industry, which the academicians are working on. And I discussed about healthcare application. I talked about defense application. I talked about agriculture application. You see anywhere. I talked about in automobile, like in smart cars. Google Smart Card is there. So much. I mean, any company, you talk about any multinational, they are all working on machine learning. They are all working on deep learning. So this AI, machine learning, deep learning. So everything. People are, as I said, it's a buzzword of the century, and people are utilizing this like anything. And why? The reason is, say, in Shingur, there might be a primary health center. There might be a hospital, district hospital. There may be a very few doctors. So consider, say, you have a orthopedic surgeon, and you have a fracture, and you require a surgery. You have a fracture in your hand, and you require a surgery. So how do you work on that? This images of your this X-ray images of your fracture, they can be put into the machine learning to the system, and what happens is this can be checked to see where exactly the fracture has occurred, or what kind of so basically the point is, so in spite, you don't need the specialist doctors everywhere. Say for a tumor, a person has a tumor, there was some images taken and it was shared, and machine learning tries to identify the tumor. Say for breast cancer, you have heard about breast cancer, the cervical cancer. So this kind of cancer, they require imaging, and from imaging, the machine will detect that this is the tumor here. So in that case, you don't need to wait for the doctors to get a confirmation, because getting an appointment with a specialist doctor, especially in Shingur or any remote, any other suburban areas, that would be a very tough thing. And think about the remote regions, it will be much tougher. Next question.
Okay. Next question was asked by Abhishek Nath. Which library is best for analysis and featuring cadastral images or satellite in Python?
Satellite images in Python, those are satellite images are called like SAR images. Those are very heavy, and those heavy means they are in some 100,000 gigabytes and terabytes in basically what happens is this in satellite image analysis with Python, this can be also done, and there are very GitHub and other OpenStreetMap APIs where you can work on that. And I basically don't work on satellite images, but you can just check on GitHub, and you can use the Python client API, and maybe you can, there is a Rasterio you can check that is used for organizing and storing the gridded raster dataset as satellite imagery. And then you have the matplotlib functions, and those libraries also you can do that. And basically, you can also, I mean, you can have a, you can check GitHub for more information, and you can also, other than Rasterio, there is GeoTIFF, NumPy, and all this. So you can just check that. Next question.
Sorry for
question.
interfere, sir. I'm Abhishek Nath. I have another question. If I want to some contour mapping about some drone camera, and take some pictures, and can I do any contour mapping on Python with OpenCV?
Yeah, OpenCV, I mean, you can integrate with Python, and that scope is there. And are you working on drone images now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So basically, you are trying to find the contour of the landscape, right?
Yes.
The drone is there.
And others topographical features like pump or road lamp or culvert, etc., etc.
Okay, okay, fine. So, I mean, what kind of algorithms are you using for this?
Basically, we do this in ArcGIS, but I need to convert this for our personal drone camera, and their raw images use in OpenCV, and do some features of OpenCV. Some features have sorry, I just sorry for some age detection. Have some age detection features is OpenCV, right? So can I use these age detection features to make some contour or others, identify other features like culvert, like road post, road lamp, traffic lamp post, or other things
See,
like boundaries?
OpenCV with Python is possible. NumPy, have you heard about NumPy?
Yes, NumPy.
Yeah, NumPy. Yeah, NumPy
Yeah.
or NumPy. Yeah. It's a very highly optimized library. I mean, for it can you can utilize a MATLAB style syntax also with that. And yeah, I mean, those are, I mean, what you can do is all those OpenCV array structures, they are converted to this NumPy arrays, NumPy arrays. Okay?
Yeah.
So it will be, it will also make you easier to integrate other libraries using the NumPy. I mean, also SciPy is there, Matplotlib is there. So this kind of things is there. So you will find a lot of OpenCV Python tutorials also. You can go through them where the GUI features in OpenCV, and then there will be core operations. Then there are a lot of like you were telling about segmentation or algorithms, because you need segmentation, otherwise you can't get the boundary of the image. So along with that, you need the feature detection, description. Then you have to do the video analysis also. So along with that, for your drone also, another important thing is you need a camera calibration as well as a 3D reconstruction. So all this kind of work you can do, and you can also integrate machine learning with that. So that is absolutely doable. And but there are some also issues with OpenCV and Python. So there is a good you check there is a OpenCV Python you check this NumPy and also the SciPy. I think you will get it. There are
Sir, which one is best, OpenCV with Python or OpenCV with C#?
See, I've seen students working earlier with OpenCV with C#. Now, because Python is so much, I mean, it's a scripting language, and it's very well, I mean, so many libraries we are getting. So people are now shifting to OpenCV with Python.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Now, the last question. What types of functions are there in PyTorch?
Who said that? Can I, has he used function? Can you name who has given the question? Who has requested this question? Can you tell, please?
Delta Educational Travel. Naam was not there. Name was not there.
Achha. See, PyTorch, it's a very old, I mean, basically there, PyTorch, it provides like two main features. One will be a tensor, a n-dimensional tensor, which is similar to like NumPy, but it can run on GPUs. And then the other feature would be automatic differentiation for building and training neural networks. So basically, there are a lot of functions. What we do is import in NumPy, and then in PyTorch, the tensors is there. So there are a lot of functions like import. I mean, we import the torch function, and basically we can there we need different functions like what we can do is we can create a neural network with that by initialize also weights and create random input output data, and basically we can work with PyTorch with the tensors, and AutoGrad is another package in PyTorch which uses that. So automatic differentiation using AutoGrad is there. So this kind of packages we use along with the functions.
Thank you, sir. We have almost covered all the questions. If you have any other question, please send us to mail. Now, I would like to request our head of the department, Mr. Sandipan Basu, to speak few words.
Thank you, Mr. Anupam Sen. Thank you, Professor Das, for your valuable lecture and valuable time. I'm sure that the participants they got some basic information about the different aspects of machine learning process of processing the images in different fields, as you mentioned in the start of your lecture. Now, I would request our Honorable Principal Sir, Dr. Shantanu Chakraborty, to say a few words and conclude the session.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Dear participants and organizing teachers of Department of Computer Science of Government General Degree College, Chingur, I would like to congratulate all of you for another successful arrangement of webinars. We are enlightened and sincerely thankful to Dr. Abhishek Das, sir. Machine learning is going to have a great impact on human life in near and far future. The journey of machine learning has already been started. The endeavor of the Computer Science Department, their HOD, Sandipan, and Shamit and Anupam, is really praiseworthy. IQAC of our college is continuously supporting many such events regularly organized by our college. Last but not the least, the support of all the faculties of this college who are constantly supporting all the events, crossing the barrier of subjects, is gratefully acknowledged. I also thank all the participants for their presence, their enthusiasm, and their questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable speech. Now, I would request the participants to fill the feedback form to get the certificates via email within 3 days. And once again, I congratulate and thank you, Professor Das, for your valuable lecture. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I just have one thing to say to the participants. If you have any questions, I shared my email at the start of my presentation. So you can get back to me, or you can contact the organizers, and if you have any queries, I can also help you later on. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.